Jessica Carter walked through the sliding glass doors of the airport terminal with the kind of confidence that comes only from years of discipline, experience, and self-assurance. She moved with a purposeful stride, her eyes scanning the concourse with a practiced calm, taking in the hustle of travelers, the rolling luggage, the announcements echoing through the cavernous space. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, almost military in its precision, a habit ingrained from years spent in one of the most elite military units the United States had to offer. Navy SEALs weren't just trained for combat. They were trained for control, for poise, for presence. And Jessica carried every ounce of that training with her now, even in an environment as ordinary and mundane as an airport. The terminal was crowded that morning. Families with small children darted around, wheeling oversized suitcases and pulling strollers. Impatient business travelers tapped on their phones while checking departure boards, and security personnel moved briskly, maintaining order amid the chaos. Jessica's eyes, however, were trained to see more than just the surface. She noticed the subtle tensions between travelers, the micro-expressions of stress, fatigue, or impatience, and she interpreted them quickly and silently, as if reading a room in preparation for something far more critical than a flight. She adjusted her backpack slightly, feeling the weight settle across her shoulders, a familiar physical reminder of the gear she once carried on missions in the most dangerous corners of the world. Compared to that, a first-class seat was nothing, but the principle of order and respect mattered even here. She approached the boarding gate, where a cluster of passengers had already begun lining up. Her ticket was clearly marked, her reservation confirmed days in advance. As she reached the counter, she presented her ID and boarding pass, her expression calm, professional, composed. The gate agent smiled politely, glancing at the ticket. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter," she said, sliding the pass back. "First class, right this way." Jessica returned the smile with a small nod, acknowledging the gesture without letting it affect her demeanor. She stepped onto the jet bridge and felt the subtle thrill that always accompanied flight, even after countless missions in helicopters and transport planes in war zones. There was something about boarding an aircraft that demanded focus, attention to detail, and the ability to assess one's environment quickly. Even now, decades after leaving active duty, those instincts had not dulled. As she entered the cabin, Jessica noticed the familiar hum of air conditioning, mingling with the soft murmur of conversation. The first-class section was nearly full, with a scattering of passengers adjusting pillows, opening tablets, or sipping coffee. She made her way down the aisle, her presence commanding attention without effort. Heads turned briefly, some in curiosity, others with subtle recognition of someone who carried herself differently from the average traveler. Jessica did not mind the glances. She was accustomed to being observed, to being studied, to being measured against a standard that few could truly understand. Reaching her assigned seat, she slid into the plush leather with a sense of quiet satisfaction. First-class comfort was a far cry from the rigid, metal bunks of military transport planes, yet she appreciated it in its own way. She placed her backpack securely in the overhead compartment, careful to keep her movements precise and unhurried. The seatbelt clicked into place, and she leaned back slightly, taking a moment to breathe and survey her surroundings. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, and the soft hum of engines waiting to start created a rhythmic, almost meditative backdrop. Jessica's attention was drawn to the other passengers. There was a young couple in matching business attire, whispering over a tablet, clearly preparing for a presentation or meeting. Across the aisle, an older man with a newspaper clutched in one hand and a tablet in the other seemed completely absorbed in his own world, oblivious to the environment around him. Even in these ordinary moments, Jessica's mind cataloged the details, noting behavior patterns, estimating emotional states, and subtly preparing for the unexpected. It was second nature. As she settled in, A flight attendant approached, smiling warmly. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Can I offer you a beverage before we take off? Coffee, tea, or perhaps something stronger?" Jessica smiled politely. "Coffee, black, please," she replied. Her tone was measured, calm, confident, the way a SEAL would communicate in the midst of planning a mission. The attendant nodded, retreating toward the galley, and Jessica allowed herself a brief exhale, appreciating the calm before the minor storm she would soon face. The flight attendants moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting pillows, assisting passengers, and preparing for departure. Jessica observed their movements, noting the synchronization and flow. She had been trained to notice these subtle dynamics, the way people interacted, responded, and moved. It was useful for everything from planning an infiltration to predicting human behavior under stress. While this flight was, in every way, mundane, the observation habits remained intact, unbroken by years of civilian life. As the boarding process continued, Jessica allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the journey that had led her here, from the rigorous days at SEAL training, where exhaustion was a constant companion and failure was not an option, to deployments in hostile territories, where every decision could mean life or death. She thought about her fellow SEALs, the camaraderie forged under fire, the bonds that were unbreakable, even in the face of unimaginable danger. And now, here she was, sitting quietly in a first-class seat on a commercial flight, the stark contrast between past and present almost surreal. Her eyes flicked to the window, where the morning sun cast long streaks across the tarmac. The plane's engines began to roar softly, signaling the impending departure. Jessica adjusted her posture, straightening her back, centering herself. She was ready, not just for the flight, but for whatever small tests of patience, bureaucracy, or human judgment might arise. Life had taught her that situations could shift in an instant, and preparedness was always a necessity. Nearby, a young mother struggled with a toddler, trying to keep the child occupied as boarding continued. Jessica offered a brief, encouraging smile, a small nod of empathy. Even in the structured, controlled environment of military life, moments of human connection had been important tiny acknowledgments that one was not entirely alone in the chaos of existence. In this ordinary airport terminal, those moments still held significance, reminding her that courage was not only tested in battlefields, but also in the mundane interactions of daily life. Finally, the last of the boarding passengers found their seats. The cabin door closed, and the flight attendants moved down the aisle, conducting final checks. Jessica felt the familiar vibration of the plane as it prepared for taxi, engines humming with latent power. She adjusted her seatbelt, ensuring it was snug, and allowed herself a small, quiet smile. This moment, this ordinary beginning to a simple flight, was a brief oasis of calm before the small yet undeniable storm that awaited her. Unbeknownst to Jessica, the upcoming confrontation would challenge her patience in a way no battlefield had a test not of strength or tactical skill, but of dignity, recognition, and the quiet authority earned only through a lifetime of service. She was about to experience how ordinary rules and human judgments could collide with respect, honor, and instinctive recognition in the most unexpected of ways. And though she could not know it yet, her presence in that first-class seat, her quiet confidence, and the symbol on her back would soon demand acknowledgement. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Jessica closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She thought about the journey, the miles traveled, and the discipline that had brought her to this point. She thought about resilience, about patience, about the unspoken bond between those who serve and those who recognize service when they see it. And above all, she reminded herself that courage took many forms, not all visible, not all recognized immediately, but always present in those who carried it. With a soft roar, the engine surged and the plane lifted off the ground. Jessica felt the familiar pull of ascent, a reminder of flight and movement, of transition from one world to another. In that moment, she was calm, poised, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The story of this flight, she could not yet know, would become more than a journey from point A to point B. It would become a testament to recognition, respect, and the quiet power of presence, a story that would linger in the memories of all who witnessed it. Jessica leaned back, allowing herself a moment of quiet anticipation, unaware that the events about to unfold would test more than her patience. They would remind everyone on that plane that courage, service, and honor are visible to those who truly see. And it all began in that ordinary, unassuming moment, with a woman quietly seated in first class, prepared for whatever came next. Jessica had barely settled into her first-class seat when the tranquility she had briefly enjoyed began to dissolve. The cabin, filled with soft murmurs and the occasional rustle of bags, suddenly felt a little tighter, a little more charged. A flight attendant, mid-20s at most, approached her with a polite but firm expression that hinted at authority, tempered with corporate procedure. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her voice professional, but with an edge that suggested she had memorized a script. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake. You're not supposed to be seated in first class." Jessica blinked, momentarily surprised. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable firmness. "I have a first-class ticket. This is my assigned seat." She reached into her bag, retrieving her boarding pass and sliding it across the armrest toward the attendant. The young woman took it, scanned it, and shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said again, avoiding Jessica's gaze. "There was an error in the seating chart. You'll need to move to economy." The words landed like a punch in the chest. Jessica had faced more dangerous confrontations than this, but the indignity of it stung. This wasn't a life-or-death mission. It was a bureaucratic mistake, but she could feel the weight of unfairness pressing in. She remained calm, however. SEALs are trained to control their reactions, to maintain composure under pressure, and to choose their battles wisely. "I understand," she said, her tone even, measured. "But my ticket is correct. It's first class. I reserved this seat weeks ago." She gestured toward the flight attendant. "Can you show me where the error occurred?" The attendant hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I don't handle those details," she stammered. "I was instructed by the gate staff to inform you." Jessica felt her jaw tighten slightly. In combat, clarity of chain of command was crucial. Here, in civilian life, instructions often felt arbitrary. She took a slow, deliberate breath, centering herself. Patience would be her weapon. "All right," she said softly. "Then let's speak with someone who can correct this." The attendant nodded nervously, as if this interaction were escalating beyond her training. She walked down the aisle, speaking into her headset, her voice low but urgent. Jessica watched her, noting the subtle anxiety in her movements. People who handle power poorly often display it physically. She recognized it instantly. Minutes passed, and the murmur of passengers grew. A few began to notice the tension, glancing curiously at the interaction unfolding in the corner. Jessica's heart rate remained steady. She was trained to assess threats quickly and remain composed, but she also knew that humans were unpredictable. She had learned long ago that even the smallest challenge could escalate if handled improperly. Finally, the attendant returned, flanked by another crew member. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you really need to move to economy," she repeated, her voice slightly firmer. Jessica rose slightly in her seat, leaning forward. She maintained eye contact, her posture calm yet commanding. "I understand your position, but I cannot accept that. This seat is assigned to me. Please have someone in authority handle this issue immediately." Her voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable authority behind it, honed from years of giving orders and expecting results. The crew members exchanged a quick glance, the kind that suggested hesitation, confusion, and uncertainty. Jessica noticed the passengers watching now, some whispering, some curious, some quietly judging. She felt a flicker of irritation, not at them, but at the absurdity of having to assert her rights in such a mundane environment. One of the attendants sighed, clearly frustrated, and spoke into her headset again. "Captain, we have a situation. Passenger claims a first-class seat." Jessica took a slow, controlled breath. She didn't need to argue anymore. She had handled confrontations far more dangerous than this. But what unsettled her wasn't fear, it was the principle. Respect was earned, not given arbitrarily. And yet, here, it seemed as though bureaucracy and oversight were dictating reality. Minutes dragged, the quiet tension in the cabin thickening. Nearby passengers shifted in their seats, some craning their necks, curious. Jessica could sense their anticipation, the silent question of who would prevail. She allowed herself a moment to reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here she was, a woman who had faced life-and-death situations, being asked to yield her rightful seat because of an administrative error. Yet she remained calm, centered, and composed. Finally, the gate agent, who had been called for backup, approached. She was older, with an air of experience and authority. "Ma'am," she began, addressing Jessica, "we've had a seating conflict. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but first class is full, and—" Jessica cut her off gently but firmly. "With all due respect, this seat is assigned to me. My ticket confirms it. Please check the manifest yourself." The gate agent hesitated, frowning as she pulled out her tablet and began scrolling through passenger information. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Jessica remained still, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her eyes calm, scanning the room subtly, noting passengers' reactions, crew members' body language. In that quiet observation, she found a strange satisfaction. Even in confrontation, her training allowed her to remain unshakable. After what felt like an eternity, the gate agent looked up, frustrated. I see that you are listed," she admitted reluctantly. "But I'm not sure why the first-class section was overbooked." Jessica nodded slowly. "That's why I requested someone in authority. The overbooking is your issue, not mine. I am entitled to my assigned seat." The agent hesitated again, glancing nervously at the flight attendants. It was clear she wasn't comfortable asserting herself in front of the veteran sitting quietly in the corner. Something about Jessica's posture, her calm demeanor, the subtle confidence that radiated without arrogance, gave the impression that she was not to be trifled with. The moment was interrupted by a small commotion further down the aisle. A toddler had dropped a toy, and the mother had leaned to retrieve it, distracting herself for a moment. Jessica watched silently, her attention sharp but unobtrusive. It reminded her that the world rarely stopped moving, even when one's attention was consumed by a confrontation. Life, she realized, continued around her, indifferent to disputes over seats. The flight attendants now stood awkwardly by, unsure of how to proceed. Jessica, sensing the hesitation, allowed herself a small inward smile. In combat, the principle was clear. If your adversary hesitates, maintain your position and let the situation resolve in your favor. She remained perfectly still, a calm presence in a sea of anxious energy. Suddenly, one of the first-class passengers, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, leaned over. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely, though curiosity laced his tone. Jessica shook her head slightly, giving a small, polite smile. "Just a minor seating conflict," she said softly. Her tone was courteous but firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The man nodded, returning to his own space, apparently satisfied with her explanation. The attendants exchanged nervous glances. Clearly, they were unprepared for someone who refused to be intimidated by protocol or perceived authority. Jessica's presence commanded attention without her having to speak further, a quiet testament to experience and confidence. The cabin continued to hum with quiet anticipation as the plane prepared for departure. Passengers whispered among themselves, some noticing the tension, some curious about the woman who refused to move. Jessica's mind, meanwhile, drifted briefly to her past missions, the countless times she had navigated far more dangerous conflicts, the weight of responsibility for lives under her command, the precision required in moments that demanded split-second decisions. Compared to those experiences, this was trivial, but it still mattered. Dignity mattered. Respect mattered. The gate agent finally looked up, sighing again. "Captain, we may need you to intervene," she muttered, almost as if confessing a crime. Jessica leaned back slightly, her gaze calm but alert. She didn't need to say anything. She simply waited. She had learned that patience, composure, and presence were often more powerful than words in commanding a situation. As the plane's engines began to rumble in preparation for taxiing, the tension in the cabin became palpable. Even those not directly involved felt it. Jessica remained unmoved, a silent anchor amid the uncertainty. And in that quiet calm, she knew, without knowing exactly how, that someone would soon recognize the significance of her presence. Something about her stance, her demeanor, and the subtle glimpse of the tattoo on her back whispered a story of experience, of honor, of service beyond the ordinary. And in that charged, silent moment, the storm was approaching, an unexpected acknowledgement that would soon shift the balance of the confrontation entirely. Jessica Carter walked down the narrow aisle, her posture upright, her movements deliberate, as if each step were a measured drill. Her first-class seat, once a promise of comfort and quiet, now felt like a distant memory. Around her, the cabin was alive with subtle whispers and quiet glances from curious passengers. Some looked confused, some sympathetic, and others plainly entertained by the minor spectacle unfolding. Jessica's expression remained calm, almost serene, but inside she felt the prickling sting of humiliation. For someone who had faced life-or-death situations on foreign soil, who had carried the weight of countless missions and lives on her shoulders, being told she could not occupy her rightful seat felt absurd. The young flight attendant who had delivered the news lingered awkwardly nearby, avoiding direct eye contact. Her attempts at authority had faltered under Jessica's composed insistence, but now she seemed to try compensating with procedural firmness. "Please follow me, ma'am," she said, motioning toward the economy section with an uneasy smile. Jessica nodded politely, choosing diplomacy over confrontation, even as the injustice of the situation burned quietly beneath her calm exterior. As she walked past the first-class rows, Jessica could feel the weight of stares. Heads turned slightly, eyes flicking toward her, measuring her reactions. Some passengers whispered softly, curious about the woman being escorted to the back. A few exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what they were witnessing. Jessica noticed the subtle mixture of pity and fascination in their expressions. It was a strange feeling, unlike the life-or-death encounters of her past. This humiliation was public, and yet entirely trivial. It was a clash between civilian bureaucracy and the recognition one earns through action. She focused on her breathing, a habit drilled into her during countless training exercises. In Navy SEAL training, every task, no matter how physically or mentally grueling, required focus. Panic or frustration could cost a life. Now, that discipline served her differently. She controlled the emotional impact of humiliation, absorbing it with measured awareness, rather than letting it break her. Yet, even as she walked, she allowed herself a quiet internal reflection. Jessica's mind drifted back to her SEAL training. The memories were vivid, the freezing waters of BUDS training, where recruits battled hypothermia and exhaustion. The sleepless nights on tactical exercises that pushed every recruit to the edge of endurance. the relentless physical and mental tests that separated the capable from the exceptional. In those moments, humiliation was constant failure, exhaustion, ridicule, but it was meaningful. Every trial prepared her for the dangers she would face in real missions. And now, in this civilian space, she faced a trivial humiliation that lacked the gravity of her former trials, yet it stung because it felt arbitrary. The tattoo on her upper back, partially visible beneath the edge of her jacket, caught the sunlight streaming through the airplane window. It was a subtle but powerful reminder of who she was, a symbol of her commitment, her sacrifices, and the intense bonds forged in the crucible of elite military service. The design, a trident intertwined with the seal insignia, was not just decoration. It was a badge of honor, a silent testament to courage and resilience. It carried a story that few would understand, but its presence alone radiated authority and command. Jessica's steps carried her past passengers who watched in quiet fascination. Some whispered to each other, "Who is she? Why is she being moved?" Others exchanged glances, unsure how to react. She could feel their curiosity and judgment, but she chose to remain composed. Pride was a quiet force, and she had learned long ago that dignity could not be dictated by others' opinions. She reached the economy section, where rows of seats felt more crowded and less inviting than the spacious luxury of first class. The leather was less forgiving, the legroom cramped, and the lighting harsher. Yet Jessica maintained her poise. She chose the seat nearest the window, placing her bag overhead with deliberate care. Her hands moved smoothly, efficiently, each motion reflecting a discipline honed over years of service. Even in this moment of public inconvenience, she refused to relinquish control over herself. As she sat down, she allowed her mind to wander through memories of missions past. She remembered the tension of covert operations, the adrenaline of approaching hostile zones under the cover of darkness, and the unspoken reliance on teammates whose lives depended on trust and precision. She thought of firefights where split-second decisions determined outcomes, of missions that tested endurance beyond physical and mental limits. The humiliation she faced now was minor, but it reminded her that even ordinary life could present challenges that demanded patience, strategy, and self-control. Jessica's reflection deepened as she considered the contrast between her past and present. In combat, respect was immediate and earned through action. Here, in civilian life, respect was often assumed, delayed, or withheld entirely. Rules and protocols could override logic and fairness, and yet patience remained her greatest weapon. She reminded herself that recognition, when it came, often arrived in unexpected ways. For now, she simply observed, waiting, as a SEAL learned to do in all high-stakes situations. Quietly, patiently, with unwavering attention. The murmurs of passengers grew slightly louder, some whispering speculatively, some casting sideways glances at the veteran seated among them. Jessica noticed their curiosity, but she neither acknowledged it nor reacted outwardly. Instead, she allowed herself to quietly assess her surroundings. Economy class was filled with a mix of travelers. Families, solo travelers, business people, and casual vacationers. Each movement, each expression, became a detail cataloged in her mind, a habit carried from the intelligence-gathering practices, essential in her former missions. Her thoughts then turned inward. She considered the paradox of the situation. Here she was, trained for extreme environments, capable of surviving under intense pressure, yet subjected to a trivial, bureaucratic challenge that tested patience rather than skill. Yet she saw value in the experience. It reminded her that life was not always about grand gestures or monumental victories. Sometimes, even a small test of resilience, dignity, and patience was worth navigating with the same care and awareness as a high-stakes operation. She flexed her fingers slightly, feeling the familiar tingle of muscle memory from years of physical training. Her body was relaxed but ready, a state she had cultivated during countless hours of preparation and action. In this situation, the preparation manifested as quiet authority, a silent message that she was not to be dismissed, even in the face of arbitrary rules. A few rows ahead, a child's laughter echoed through the cabin, momentarily breaking the tension. Jessica allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Humor and lightness had been rare luxuries in her military career, and she valued them now even more. Even in the midst of minor embarrassment, she could appreciate the simple joys surrounding her. As the flight attendants moved down the aisle to prepare for takeoff, Jessica noticed the subtle signs of their discomfort. They were trained to enforce rules, but they were unprepared for someone who refused to be intimidated, someone whose calm confidence radiated without arrogance. In that quiet observation, she found a strange satisfaction. Control, even when challenged, could be maintained with dignity and poise. Jessica glanced briefly at the other passengers, noting their reactions. Some were still curious, some impressed, some puzzled. Yet she remained unaffected. She had learned to focus on what mattered, to assess the situation and respond with precision. Here, patience was her tool, composure her shield, and dignity her constant companion. The hum of the engines became louder as the plane prepared for departure. The vibrations of the aircraft against the tarmac reminded her of the Carmack helicopters and transport planes she had piloted in dangerous regions. The feeling was familiar, both grounding and exhilarating. She allowed herself a moment to reflect on the journey that had led her here, to this ordinary yet oddly charged flight. The contrast between past missions and present circumstance was striking, yet instructive. Her thoughts returned to the tattoo on her back, the subtle insignia that carried profound meaning. It symbolized courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment. Even in the most mundane moments, it was a quiet declaration of identity. She realized that recognition of such dedication often came unexpectedly through observation, intuition, and respect. And in that quiet reflection, she felt a flicker of reassurance. If someone capable of seeing beyond the surface appeared, the truth of her experience would be acknowledged. The plane taxied toward the runway, the soft vibrations of the engines, a steady hum beneath her awareness. She tightened her seatbelt with deliberate care, adjusting her posture for both comfort and readiness. Her breathing remained slow and measured, a rhythm learned in situations where panic could be fatal. Though the humiliation lingered, it was tempered by her discipline. She had faced far worse and had learned that patience and calm could often resolve conflicts more effectively than confrontation. As the aircraft lifted slightly, the cabin began to settle. Passengers adjusted their seats, secured belongings, and prepared for takeoff. Jessica's mind remained engaged, aware of the subtle dynamics of human behavior around her. She had learned long ago that perception and recognition were as important as action, and she understood that even here, in this ordinary flight, those principles applied. And in that quiet, tense environment, Jessica Carter prepared herself for whatever came next. The minor humiliation she had endured would not break her, and her awareness told her that recognition might arrive from an unexpected source. Somewhere within the cabin, someone might see her for what she truly was, a person who had dedicated her life to service, whose presence alone commanded respect. And when that moment came, she would be ready, poised, and composed, as she always had been. As the plane climbed higher, Jessica Carter's thoughts drifted from the cramped cabin of economy class to the vast, open landscapes she had once traversed under the banner of duty. The subtle vibration of the aircraft beneath her feet, the hum of the engines, the faint pressure against her ears, it all reminded her of the countless aircraft she had flown in, both military transports and helicopters, each with its own rhythm, each carrying the weight of missions that demanded precision, courage, and unwavering focus. She allowed herself a brief, private smile. The contrast between her present flight and those past operations could not have been starker. Yet both shared one common thread: the need for control, awareness, and resilience. Her mind traveled back to the days of her SEAL training, the grueling initiation that separated the few capable of extraordinary commitment from the many who faltered. She remembered the freezing waters of Bud S, where recruits were submerged repeatedly in ice-cold ocean water, enduring waves of exhaustion, hypothermia, and relentless physical exertion. Every stroke, every movement, demanded endurance and focus, a lesson that failure was never an option, and that patience and composure could mean the difference between success and disaster. She could still feel the chill of that water on her skin, the burn of exertion in her muscles, and the way the mind teetered on the edge between despair and resolve. She recalled long marches across rugged terrain, often with packs that seemed impossibly heavy, each step calculated, each breath measured. The instructors pushed them to the brink, testing not just physical strength, but mental fortitude. Hunger, sleep deprivation, extreme weather, and relentless drills became daily companions, shaping a resilience that few civilians could comprehend. And yet, amidst the grueling trials, there were moments of triumph, the quiet satisfaction of completing a task when every ounce of energy had been exhausted, the rare, fleeting recognition from instructors who respected perseverance and skill. These memories surfaced now as Jessica adjusted in her economy seat, grounding her, reminding her that patience under pressure had always been her ally. Her thoughts turned to the missions themselves, operations that took her to hostile and unforgiving parts of the world. She remembered the dense jungles, the arid deserts, the urban battlegrounds, and the night skies illuminated only by the faint glow of distant fires. Every operation demanded absolute focus, coordination, and trust in her team. Lives depended on split-second decisions, silent communication, and an almost instinctual awareness of surroundings. The same discipline she had employed, then analyzing, assessing, and reacting with precision, was now her tool for navigating a flight where the threat was administrative error, and the battlefield was human judgment. The tattoo on her back, partially revealed beneath her jacket, seemed to anchor her memories. It was more than ink. It was a chronicle of her service, a declaration of identity, a silent testament to the sacrifices made and the resilience built over years of relentless training and high-stakes operations. Each line, each symbol, carried a story. Missions completed, comrades supported, personal limits pushed and overcome. That small mark on her skin was a reminder of a life lived with purpose, of values tested and proven in extreme conditions. It was both a shield and a banner, a quiet declaration that she had been forged in fire and had emerged intact, stronger than most could imagine. Jessica's thoughts wandered to the bonds forged during service, the unspoken connections between those who had faced life-and-death situations together. Trust, loyalty, and mutual respect were not merely words. They were lifelines. She remembered her teammates, their faces etched in her memory, the countless hours of preparation, the shared dangers, and the victories, large and small. These were the moments that shaped her, that imbued her with a sense of purpose that transcended individual recognition. And yet, in civilian life, she sometimes wondered if anyone truly understood the weight of such experiences, the quiet pride that accompanied service, and the deep, unshakable sense of identity it fostered. The current conflict, being moved from first class, felt trivial in comparison, yet it had stirred a complex mix of emotions. Embarrassment, frustration, and the desire for acknowledgement mingled with patience, discipline, and self-awareness. Jessica recognized the lesson inherent in the moment. Resilience was not solely tested in extreme danger. It was also exercised in the quiet endurance of everyday trials. In navigating this minor confrontation, She was employing the same principles she had relied upon in far graver circumstances: control, observation, and the strategic application of authority. Her attention returned to the passengers around her. Families, business people, and solo travelers moved through the aisles, adjusting their seats, securing their belongings, and preparing for takeoff. Some cast curious glances at her, sensing a story untold. Jessica's presence exuded a quiet authority, and even those unaware of her past could perceive it. The tattoo on her back, partially revealed as she shifted, caught the light, drawing subtle attention without overtly demanding it. She sensed that recognition, even unspoken, might emerge from someone who truly saw beyond the surface. As the engines hummed steadily, Jessica's mind continued its reflection. She remembered the times she had been underestimated, the moments when others doubted her capability or resolve. Each instance had reinforced a principle she carried to this day. True competence and authority are not always immediately visible, but they command respect once recognized. Her current predicament, minor though it was, mirrored that dynamic in miniature. The rules of civilian life, like the arbitrary authority she sometimes encountered, could be challenged not through aggression, but through patience, composure, and the quiet assertion of rightful presence. She allowed herself a brief smile at the irony. Here she was, a woman whose life had been defined by extraordinary challenges, sitting in a narrow economy seat, waiting for recognition that she knew was coming in some form. She had faced far worse hostile environments, high-stakes operations, moments where failure meant death, yet the principles remained the same: observe, assess, and act when the opportunity arose. In this context, the opportunity would arrive from an unexpected source, someone capable of understanding the silent language of courage and service. Jessica's reflections deepened as she considered the lessons of service. Discipline was not merely physical. It was mental, emotional, and moral. Patience was a weapon, composure a shield, and honor a guiding principle. The tattoo on her back symbolized all of these qualities, a visual manifestation of experiences that could not easily be conveyed through words. It was a reminder that identity and accomplishment were often recognized in subtle ways, through perception, intuition, and respect rather than through formal acknowledgement. The cabin settled into a steady rhythm, passengers adjusting to the flight's motion, flight attendants moving with practiced efficiency. Yet Jessica remained alert, aware of every detail, from the expressions of those around her to the subtle changes in crew behavior. Her mind cataloged observations, noting patterns and predicting outcomes, just as she had learned to do in training and in missions. This vigilance was both a habit and a necessity, ingrained through years of responsibility and experience. She thought of the pilot, unaware yet present somewhere ahead, moving among his instruments, preparing for the journey ahead. Jessica's instincts suggested that recognition, when it came, would not be arbitrary. It would arrive from someone capable of perceiving the significance of experience and service, someone whose understanding extended beyond superficial appearance. The tattoo on her back, the posture she maintained, and the calm authority she radiated would all play a role in bridging the gap between ordinary observation and true recognition. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Jessica allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had endured, she had observed, and she had maintained composure. The small humiliation of being moved from first class had been a test of patience and dignity, and she had passed. Yet she also sensed that the resolution of the situation was approaching. In her experience, moments of recognition often arrived suddenly and decisively, catalyzed by observation, respect, and the acknowledgement of accomplishment. Her gaze drifted to the window, where sunlight danced on the clouds below, painting shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was a reminder of the transient nature of moments, of the impermanence of discomfort, and of the opportunities that awaited recognition. Jessica allowed herself a private sense of anticipation. Something told her that the forthcoming interaction would not merely restore a seat, it would affirm the principles she had lived by: courage, composure, and silent authority earned through action. Her mind revisited the countless missions she had undertaken, each one a lesson in endurance, teamwork, and quiet heroism. From covert operations in hostile territories to high-stakes rescues, her service had demanded precision, vigilance, and unwavering commitment. Each memory reinforced the understanding that true respect is earned, not given lightly, and that recognition often arrives unexpectedly, catalyzing acknowledgement in the most surprising forms. And so, as the plane hummed steadily through the sky, Jessica Carter sat quietly in economy class, her thoughts a blend of reflection, anticipation, and calm readiness. She had faced far greater trials and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. In this minor, yet symbolically charged confrontation, the lessons of her service, patience, discipline, composure, and silent authority remained her guiding principles. Unbeknownst to her, someone was about to recognize these qualities, someone whose understanding of service, honor, and courage would shift the dynamics of the cabin entirely. And when that moment arrived, it would not merely restore her seat. It would acknowledge a lifetime of dedication, sacrifice, and resilience, visible to those who truly saw. Jessica's gaze lingered on the clouds below, and she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She was ready. Jessica Carter remained seated in the economy section, her composure steady, her posture impeccable, as the hum of the engines and the occasional murmur of passengers filled the cabin. She had long since accepted the minor injustice of being relocated from first class, though the sting of public embarrassment lingered beneath her calm exterior. She allowed herself to observe quietly, cataloging details, the expressions of passengers, the subtle hesitations of flight attendants, the efficiency of movement in the aisle. It was her way of maintaining control, of anchoring herself in a situation that was both trivial and oddly tense. As she adjusted her bag overhead and settled more comfortably into her seat, she caught sight of movement at the front of the cabin. The cockpit door opened, and the plane's pilot emerged, tall and composed, a figure of quiet authority in his crisp uniform. He moved with purpose, checking rows, exchanging brief words with flight attendants, and scanning the cabin with a practiced eye. His presence commanded immediate respect, not through loud assertion, but through confidence, posture, and the quiet certainty that he was in charge. Jessica's attention shifted subtly to him, her instincts flickering with recognition of someone capable of discernment. Even from a distance, she noted the careful, precise way he carried himself. There was a calm decisiveness in the pilot's movements, a clarity of observation that reminded her of trained officers in military operations. In his subtle yet commanding manner, she sensed an individual accustomed to assessment, quick judgment, and the evaluation of character. As the pilot's gaze swept across the cabin, it paused momentarily on Jessica. Perhaps it was her posture, her calm demeanor, or the quiet authority she radiated, but something in her presence seemed to register immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, though his expression remained composed. He moved closer, walking deliberately down the aisle, his steps purposeful but unhurried, as though he were weighing what he had just observed. Jessica did not move. She remained seated, her posture upright, her gaze calm, as if silently signaling that she was not to be dismissed. There was no challenge in her eyes, only composure and a quiet command of her space. A pilot stopped briefly, the faint overhead lights catching the edge of her jacket and revealing, ever so slightly, the tattoo etched on her upper back. It was not immediately obvious, but for someone trained to recognize symbols of military service and achievement, it was unmistakable. Recognition flashed across the pilot's face. He paused, almost imperceptibly, as he processed what he had just seen. The trident intertwined with the seal insignia was a powerful symbol, one that spoke of elite training, dangerous missions, and unwavering dedication. It was a mark of someone who had faced challenges beyond the comprehension of most civilians, someone whose experience commanded respect not through words, but through presence and history. The pilot's posture shifted subtly, an acknowledgement that this was no ordinary passenger. Jessica remained still, her gaze neutral but aware. She felt the recognition in the air, subtle yet undeniable. It was not announced with words or gestures, but it was there, a quiet acknowledgement from someone who understood the significance of what he had seen. She allowed herself a brief internal exhale, maintaining her calm exterior while registering the shift in energy around her. The pilot's presence now carried a different weight, one that hinted at resolution rather than confrontation. The flight attendants, unaware of the significance of the moment, continued their duties with efficiency, but now with a hint of hesitation. They sensed, perhaps instinctively, that the balance of authority in the cabin had shifted. The quiet, composed woman they had tried to move earlier was no longer merely a passenger. She had become a presence that commanded acknowledgement, visible even to those who had authority over the seating arrangements. The pilot approached Jessica directly, pausing beside her seat. He lowered his voice, though it carried clear authority. "Ma'am," he said, firm but respectful, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." His eyes met hers, and in that moment there was an unspoken communication. Recognition, respect, and understanding passed silently between them. It was not about entitlement to a seat. It was about acknowledgement of experience, of service, of the life that had been lived and earned. Jessica inclined her head slightly, her expression calm, composed yet alert. She had encountered many people who failed to recognize the significance of experience, and she had learned long ago how to convey authority without words. Now, she could feel the shift, the subtle change in the energy of the cabin as the pilot assessed her not merely as a passenger, but as someone whose presence carried history and significance. "Please," he continued, gesturing to the flight attendants, "allow Miss Carter to return to her assigned seat." The tone was firm, leaving no room for argument or hesitation. There was respect in his voice, an acknowledgement that went beyond protocol, beyond rules, and into the realm of recognition earned through action and sacrifice. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, quickly realizing that compliance was now not only appropriate but necessary. Jessica allowed herself a small, private smile, recognizing that the situation was resolved not through argument, but through the quiet recognition of merit and service. The pilot's intervention was subtle, dignified, and decisive, a testament to his understanding and awareness. Passengers in the cabin noticed the subtle shift. Whispers rose quietly as those nearby observed the interaction, sensing that something unusual had occurred. Jessica remained seated, composed, allowing the moment to unfold without overt acknowledgement. She had learned long ago that recognition, when genuine, did not need to be loudly declared. It was felt, understood, and respected. The pilot nodded once to Jessica, a small but meaningful gesture. In that single motion, he had conveyed acknowledgement, respect, and understanding. For someone who had spent years in service, this unspoken communication carried more weight than words could convey. Jessica inclined her head slightly in return, a gesture of quiet gratitude, maintaining her composure and dignity. As she stood to return to her first-class seat, she moved with the same deliberate control she had exhibited throughout her life. Each step was measured, confident, and calm. The flight attendants stepped aside, no longer apprehensive, now aware that the situation had shifted irrevocably. The passengers watched, curiosity and admiration flickering in their expressions. In that moment, Jessica's presence was fully acknowledged, and respect had been earned not through confrontation, but through the quiet assertion of identity and experience. Reaching her first-class seat, she paused briefly, securing her belongings and adjusting her posture. The space that had once been her rightful place now felt restored not only physically, but symbolically. It was a reaffirmation of dignity, of earned recognition, and of the subtle but powerful authority that comes from a life of discipline, courage, and service. The pilot returned to the cockpit, a quiet sense of satisfaction in his movements. He had recognized and acknowledged what few civilians could, that the woman seated in first class was no ordinary passenger, but someone whose life had been defined by extraordinary dedication and experience. His subtle intervention had corrected not just a clerical error, but a misalignment of respect and recognition. Jessica settled into her seat, feeling a quiet sense of vindication. A humiliation she had endured earlier dissipated, replaced by a sense of calm and satisfaction. The acknowledgement she had received was not about comfort or status. It was about respect, about understanding, about recognition of a life lived with courage and purpose. She allowed herself a small inward smile, reflecting on the quiet power of presence, patience, and composure. The passengers around her adjusted, some whispering softly, some casting glances of curiosity and admiration. They had witnessed a rare moment, a subtle, unspoken recognition of achievement and authority. Jessica remained calm, composed, and poised, embodying the quiet strength that had earned her both the seat and the respect of those who had the insight to recognize it. As the plane continued its ascent, Jessica allowed herself to relax slightly, appreciating the restored sense of order and dignity. She had navigated yet another test of patience and presence, not through confrontation, but through quiet strength and the recognition that sometimes true acknowledgement comes from those capable of understanding it. The pilot's subtle intervention had shifted the dynamic of the cabin, leaving a lasting impression on both the crew and the passengers. For Jessica, this moment was a reminder that life's challenges, however small or trivial they may seem, are opportunities to demonstrate resilience, dignity, and composure. Recognition, respect, and understanding often arrive in unexpected ways, and the ability to navigate situations with calm authority can transform even minor conflicts into affirmations of worth and achievement. And as she gazed out the window at the clouds below, Jessica Carter felt a quiet satisfaction. She had been acknowledged not for her words, but for her presence, her experience, and the quiet authority that emanated from a lifetime of service. The minor embarrassment of being relocated had been replaced with a subtle but profound victory, the recognition of a life defined by courage, discipline, and honor. Jessica Carter rose from her economy seat with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command, each movement deliberate, measured, and unhurried. The cabin felt different, now less tense, more respectful, as if her mere presence had subtly shifted the energy of the room. Passengers who had earlier watched her with curiosity now glanced with quiet admiration, sensing that they had been witness to something beyond the ordinary. The acknowledgement of authority, even silent, had a ripple effect, permeating the cabin in ways that words alone could not achieve. Flight attendants stepped aside, allowing her passage back to first class. Their expressions had changed hesitation and awkwardness replaced with deference and understanding. They had been part of the initial confrontation, unaware of the significance of Jessica's experience, and now they were witnessing its quiet power. Jessica noticed the subtle shift in their demeanor and maintained her composed expression, a small nod of acknowledgement, but no overt display. She had learned that dignity is most compelling when understated. As she approached her first-class seat, passengers turned slightly, craning their necks to observe the return of the woman who had briefly been displaced. Some whispered to their neighbors, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and surprise in their voices. "Did she just—" one murmured, trailing off, unsure how to articulate the unspoken recognition that had taken place. Jessica remained fully aware of the attention, yet unaffected by it, a presence so grounded in experience that ordinary opinions held little sway over her demeanor. The pilot had returned to the cockpit, but not without casting a subtle glance toward Jessica, a signal of acknowledgement that required no words. In that single, almost imperceptible gesture, he validated what the flight attendants and passengers were beginning to realize. She was no ordinary passenger. She carried a history, a dedication, and a level of experience that few could truly comprehend. Recognition, in this case, had been earned through presence, patience, and the silent display of authority. Jessica reached her seat, sliding into the familiar leather with quiet satisfaction. The comfort was almost secondary to the symbolic restoration of her rightful place. She placed her backpack securely and adjusted the seatbelt with deliberate care, a physical act underscoring the regained balance of order and respect. Cabin seemed to settle around her, the soft hum of the engines now accompanied by a palpable sense of restored harmony. A flight attendant approached her cautiously, her voice softer, tinged with respect. "Ma'am, I apologize for the confusion earlier. You may, of course, remain in your seat." Jessica inclined her head slightly, offering a polite but firm acknowledgement. Words were unnecessary beyond that. The small act of recognition, conveyed respectfully and professionally, carried more weight than any prolonged explanation could. Passengers nearby shifted in their seats, their whispers now filled with speculation and awe. Some glanced at the tattoo on Jessica's upper back, catching the light as she adjusted her jacket. For those familiar with military symbols, it was a moment of instant comprehension, a recognition that transcended casual observation. Others, unaware of the specific significance, sensed an aura of authority, discipline, and quiet confidence that demanded acknowledgement. In that small section of the cabin, respect had been earned through presence and a subtle yet undeniable display of character. As Jessica settled into the seat, she allowed herself a brief moment to reflect on the unusual chain of events. Being displaced from her rightful place had been a minor humiliation, yet it had also provided a subtle affirmation of resilience, patience, and dignity. She had navigated the confrontation not through force or argument, but through composed assertion, the quiet power of experience, and the unspoken acknowledgement of earned authority. The pilot's intervention had been decisive, yet understated, a gesture that balanced respect and correction with efficiency and discretion. The cabin now carried a different atmosphere. The flight attendants moved with renewed professionalism, their gestures slightly more deferential, their tones warmer. Passengers whispered, some speculating about the woman who had been temporarily displaced and then restored. Jessica's presence, previously a source of tension and curiosity, now radiated quiet authority. The ripple effect of recognition had transformed the environment, subtly altering the dynamics of respect, attention, and perception. Jessica allowed herself a private, inward smile. It was a reminder that true authority is often recognized without ceremony. That respect can be conveyed through observation, acknowledgement, and subtle gestures. In this ordinary flight, she had experienced a rare intersection of bureaucracy and human understanding, a moment where recognition had bridged the gap between rules and merit, procedure and experience. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the broader implications. Throughout her life, she had encountered countless situations where recognition was delayed, withheld, or misunderstood. In those moments, composure, patience, and the silent assertion of worth had often been the most effective tools. The subtle acknowledgement she had just received was more meaningful than any formal accolade. It was a recognition of presence, experience, and dedication, visible to those capable of seeing beyond surface appearances. Jessica adjusted her seat slightly, scanning the cabin once more. The pilot remained in the cockpit, occasionally glancing back, a silent acknowledgement that the situation had been resolved appropriately. Flight attendants moved efficiently, their earlier uncertainty replaced with confidence in their actions. Passengers settled into their seats, some still observing her, others quietly reflecting on the subtle drama that had unfolded before them. The hum of the engines and the rhythmic vibration of the plane created a steady backdrop, grounding Jessica in the present while allowing her mind to process the events that had just transpired. The conflict had been minor in comparison to the high-stakes situations she had faced throughout her military career, yet it had provided a subtle but profound affirmation of principles she had lived by: patience, composure, dignity, and quiet authority. Jessica's gaze drifted to the window, where sunlight painted patterns on the clouds below. The scene reminded her of the countless landscapes she had once traversed on missions, deserts, mountains, oceans, and urban battlefields. The comparison was stark, a minor confrontation in a commercial flight versus life-or-death operations in hostile environments. Yet the lesson was similar. Composure, awareness, and quiet assertion of presence could transform outcomes, earning respect and recognition in ways that overt confrontation could not. Her thoughts returned to the passengers nearby. Some had witnessed the full arc of the confrontation, the displacement, the subtle tension, and the restoration of her seat. Their reactions ranged from curiosity to admiration, with some whispering conjectures about her identity. Jessica remained composed, allowing the unspoken recognition to exist without comment or explanation. True acknowledgement required no words. It was understood through observation, demeanor, and the quiet projection of experience. The flight attendants, now operating with renewed confidence, moved down the aisle, attending to passengers with professionalism and grace. Jessica observed them quietly, noting the subtle change in their behavior. Where hesitation and uncertainty had once dominated, there was now a clear deference, a recognition that she was not an ordinary passenger, but someone deserving of acknowledgement and respect. The shift was subtle, yet powerful, a testament to the effect of quiet authority on those capable of perceiving it. Jessica leaned back in her seat, adjusting her posture to a state of calm alertness. The minor embarrassment she had endured earlier had been replaced with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The pilot's recognition had validated her experience in a way that transcended the immediate conflict, affirming her presence, dignity, and the principles she had lived by throughout her life. The subtle ripple of acknowledgement extended beyond her immediate surroundings. Passengers whispered quietly, exchanging observations and speculation. Even those unfamiliar with the significance of her tattoo sensed the aura of discipline, composure, and authority she radiated. In that moment, Jessica's presence had transformed the cabin, creating a palpable atmosphere of respect and recognition. She allowed herself a brief inward smile, reflecting on the journey that had led to this point. Years of discipline, training, and service had prepared her for far greater challenges. Yet the principles remained the same: composure, patience, and the quiet assertion of authority could influence outcomes and command respect. The restoration of her seat was more than a correction of a minor error. It was a validation of her experience, a subtle acknowledgement of a life defined by courage, dedication, and discipline. As the plane settled into cruising altitude, Jessica remained composed, her mind attuned to the environment around her. She observed passengers, crew, and subtle changes in behavior, cataloging details with the same awareness she had applied in every mission and training exercise. The subtle power of recognition, she realized, could transform even ordinary moments into affirmations of dignity, presence, and earned respect. Her gaze lingered on the clouds outside, the sunlight illuminating the cabin in shifting patterns. In that quiet moment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the rigorous trials of SEAL training to the high-stakes missions she had undertaken, to the seemingly mundane confrontation on a commercial flight. The lesson remained consistent. Authority, respect, and recognition are often earned not through force or argument, but through composure, presence, and the subtle projection of experience and dignity. And as she settled fully into her restored seat, Jessica Carter allowed herself a small, private exhale of satisfaction. The humiliation of displacement had passed, replaced by acknowledgement, respect, and the quiet affirmation of her identity. She had navigated the conflict not with confrontation, but with patience, composure, and presence, and the outcome had reaffirmed the principles that had guided her throughout her life. Jessica Carter leaned back into the first-class seat, the soft leather adjusting to her frame, offering comfort she had briefly been denied. Yet the physical comfort was almost secondary to the emotional restoration that had taken place. Being acknowledged by the pilot had transformed the situation completely. Where earlier she had felt embarrassment, frustration, and a subtle sting of humiliation, now there was calm, a quiet satisfaction rooted in the principles she had lived by for years: composure, dignity, and earned respect. Her eyes drifted around the cabin. Passengers were subtly shifting, some exchanging quiet whispers, others casting furtive glances her way. Jessica recognized the curiosity in their expressions, but also noticed something deeper: admiration. The energy in the cabin had changed. Initially charged with uncertainty and tension, it now carried a soft undercurrent of respect. Some passengers had already pieced together the story from the subtle cues: the pilot's intervention, the crew's deference, the tattoo glimpsed beneath her jacket. A woman across the aisle leaned toward her companion, whispering just loud enough for Jessica to catch a fragment. She's military, right? SEAL, maybe? Jessica allowed herself a faint smile, though her expression remained outwardly calm and neutral. She had long learned that recognition of service, when it came, should be granted quietly, without fanfare. Yet the acknowledgement of peers, those who understood the weight of sacrifice and dedication, held a quiet satisfaction that no words could match. Her mind, as always, was attentive, cataloging both the environment and the subtle reactions of those around her. The flight attendants moved with renewed professionalism, their gestures now measured and respectful. The earlier hesitation and discomfort had vanished. They had witnessed the quiet assertion of authority and the unspoken acknowledgement from someone who understood service and dedication. The shift in the dynamic had been complete. Jessica allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had led her here. She had endured years of grueling SEAL training, missions in hostile territories, and countless moments where failure was not an option. She had learned discipline, patience, and the subtle power of presence. Recognition had always been secondary to duty, yet its value was undeniable. In this ordinary flight, she had experienced a small but meaningful acknowledgement of her life's work, a reminder that even in mundane circumstances, the principles that guided her could manifest and earn respect. Her gaze wandered to the tattoo on her back, partially visible as she adjusted in her seat. It was more than ink. It was a symbol, a badge of identity, a chronicle of service. The trident intertwined with the SEAL insignia told a story few would understand fully, yet it communicated something profound to those who could perceive it: courage, resilience, and the quiet authority of someone forged in extraordinary circumstances. The pilot had recognized it instantly, a testament to both his discernment and the unspoken respect among those who shared in Honda's understanding of service. As the flight continued, Jessica observed the subtle ripple effect her presence had on the passengers. A man near the back of the cabin shifted slightly, watching her with renewed interest. A young woman whispered to her companion, glancing again toward Jessica, as if piecing together a story that extended beyond the visible. The admiration in their eyes was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, reflective, and sincere. Jessica understood this instinctively. True recognition did not need proclamation. It was felt, understood, and internalized. She allowed her mind to drift back to moments in her service where acknowledgement had been subtle yet deeply meaningful. A nod from a team leader during an operation, a silent glance exchanged with a teammate in a critical moment, a quiet acknowledgement from superiors after a mission had succeeded, all had carried profound significance. They were reminders that true recognition does not require ceremony. It is expressed through understanding, perception, and respect. The cabin remained calm, passengers settling into their routines, yet the energy had shifted irrevocably. Jessica's presence carried authority without aggression, dignity without arrogance. Those around her, whether fully aware of her background or not, had sensed it. It was a lesson she had carried through life. The most effective influence is often quiet, subtle, and grounded in self-assurance rather than overt assertion. Jessica reflected on the irony of the situation. A minor administrative error had provided a moment for her to exercise patience, composure, and presence. It had been a test of ordinary circumstances, far removed from the life-or-death situations of her military career, yet no less meaningful in its demonstration of character. The resolution had come not through argument, but through the subtle acknowledgement of authority by someone capable of recognizing it. The pilot. She allowed herself a brief inward smile, recalling the pilot's demeanor. He had approached with calm professionalism, assessed the situation with discernment, and intervened decisively yet discreetly. There was no need for dramatics, no need for spectacle, only a quiet understanding of what was deserved. In that moment, Jessica felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Respect had been restored, dignity reaffirmed, and the principles that guided her life quietly validated. Her attention drifted again to the passengers nearby. Some were observing, some whispering softly, and some simply reflecting on the unusual turn of events. Jessica understood that for many, it was a lesson in perception, the understanding that appearances could be deceptive, and that quiet authority and experience might not be immediately visible, yet remained undeniable once perceived. The flight attendants moved with renewed efficiency, their confidence restored. The initial tension that had arisen from the seat reassignment was replaced with an atmosphere of smooth professionalism. Even the passengers who had been curious or skeptical seemed to absorb the quiet narrative unfolding around them. A woman whose life had been defined by extraordinary circumstances had quietly asserted her presence, earning acknowledgement and respect in the process. Jessica allowed herself to think about the broader significance. Moments like these, she realized, are mirrors of life's greater lessons. The challenges of civilian life may not carry the stakes of military operations, yet they test patience, composure, and the ability to maintain dignity under pressure. The principles that guided her in combat discipline, observation, and quiet authority were equally valuable in navigating ordinary conflicts. Recognition, when it arrives, often does so subtly, through perception and understanding rather than confrontation. She considered how many passengers might have missed the significance entirely, observing only the surface of events. Yet the pilot had seen, understood, and acted. That acknowledgement carried weight, not just for her, but as a reminder to others. True respect is earned, subtle, and profound. It validates experience and character without requiring loud proclamation. Jessica adjusted in her seat, feeling a quiet sense of completion. The minor humiliation of being displaced had been transformed into an affirmation of her values. Her composure had guided her through the ordeal, and the subtle acknowledgement by the pilot had restored order, respect, and dignity. She felt a rare, quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from navigating challenges effectively, maintaining one's principles, and being recognized by those capable of understanding their significance. The flight continued, the rhythmic hum of the engines a steady backdrop. Jessica's gaze drifted to the clouds below, watching the sunlight shift over the horizon. She reflected on the rare beauty of ordinary moments that contain extraordinary lessons. Life, she realized, often presents opportunities for quiet demonstration of character. Recognition, patience, and composure are as meaningful in everyday encounters as they are in life or death situations. Her mind wandered to future possibilities. Perhaps some of the passengers had internalized a lesson in respect and perception. Perhaps others would carry the memory of quiet authority and earned recognition into their own lives. Jessica understood that influence often spreads in subtle, unseen ways. One moment, one interaction, one acknowledgement could ripple outward, creating an impact far beyond the immediate situation. As she settled fully into her first-class seat, Jessica allowed herself to relax slightly, her posture still composed, her mind alert yet calm. She had navigated the challenge of displacement, the subtle embarrassment of public scrutiny, and the restoration of her rightful place with patience, dignity, and quiet authority. The acknowledgement of her experience by the pilot had transformed a minor conflict into a profound affirmation of principles, discipline, and earned respect. And in that quiet moment, Jessica Carter felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. She had faced an ordinary challenge with the same composure and strategic awareness she had applied in extraordinary circumstances. She had been acknowledged for her experience, her presence, and her quiet authority. Passengers had observed, some with curiosity, some with admiration. Flight attendants had adjusted, the pilot had recognized, and the cabin had been subtly transformed. This was not a moment of grandeur or ceremony, but it was a moment of truth, a moment that affirmed what she had always known, that patience, composure, dignity, and quiet authority can command respect in any circumstance. Recognition does not require spectacle. It requires understanding, perception, and the capacity to acknowledge what is earned. Jessica gazed out at the clouds below, sunlight streaming through the window, casting a golden glow across the cabin. She allowed herself a small, private smile. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that the principles she had lived by discipline, composure, and the quiet assertion of authority would continue to guide her. Even in moments both ordinary and extraordinary, the plane continued to cruise steadily, slicing through the sky with the smooth precision of controlled power. Jessica Carter sat in her restored first-class seat, feeling the soft leather cradle her back as the sunlight streamed through the window. It was a moment of quiet serenity, yet beneath the calm, a sense of empowerment and validation pulsed steadily. The ordeal of earlier being moved to economy, the whispered stares. The subtle humiliation had been transformed into a profound affirmation of her identity, experience, and discipline. She allowed herself to reflect on the encounter, replaying the moment the pilot had recognized her seal tattoo. That brief acknowledgement, subtle yet unmistakable, had shifted the dynamics of the entire cabin. The flight attendants now treated her with professional deference. Passengers' whispers carried admiration rather than curiosity, and the pilot's confident intervention had reminded her that authority rooted in earned experience commands respect. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible victory, but one that resonated deeply. Jessica's mind wandered back through her life, tracing the path that had led her to this ordinary yet symbolic confrontation. The grueling years of SEAL training, the freezing waters, the endless runs, the mental challenges that tested the limits of endurance, had forged her character. Those experiences, which had often been endured in silence and under extreme pressure, had instilled resilience, patience, and a sense of disciplined composure that now guided her through civilian life. The lesson was clear. The principles that define true strength and authority do not fade. They simply find new arenas in which to assert themselves. She thought of her missions, the countless operations where lives depended on split-second decisions, trust in teammates, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. In those moments, humiliation, fear, and uncertainty were frequent companions, yet mastery over one's emotions and the careful application of skill were paramount. Now, even in the relatively benign environment of a commercial flight, those same skills, observation, composure, and the quiet assertion of presence had proven decisive. The pilot had seen what others could not, recognizing the life of service embedded in her posture, demeanor, and tattoo. Jessica's gaze shifted to the passengers around her. Some were still whispering, subtle awe evident in their expressions. Others observed quietly, taking note of the calm authority she exuded. She realized that recognition often inspires reflection. Perhaps a young professional nearby would carry a lesson in respect and perception into the boardroom. Perhaps a family observing her demeanor would later discuss courage and composure. Even in mundane circumstances, extraordinary examples of character resonate, creating ripples of influence far beyond the immediate moment. The flight attendants, now operating with renewed confidence, approached their tasks with precision and attentiveness. They had witnessed a rare, subtle demonstration of authority and recognition, and their actions reflected both professionalism and respect. Jessica understood instinctively that the quiet lessons of this encounter would remain with them as well. Moments of leadership and acknowledgement, even in minor conflicts, have a way of leaving lasting impressions. Jessica's thoughts returned to the pilot. He had approached with calm authority, observed, recognized, and corrected the situation without spectacle. It was the kind of decisive, understated action she had respected throughout her life, the hallmark of someone capable of recognizing true merit. In a world often dominated by noise, ego, and superficial assessment, his understanding had been rare and powerful. She felt a sense of kinship, not of familiarity, but of mutual recognition. Two individuals accustomed to discerning what is meaningful, valuing substance over appearance. Her reflection deepened as she considered the passengers' silent reactions. True admiration is often quiet, expressed not in applause or words, but in attention, observation, and subtle gestures. She noticed heads turned slightly in her direction, whispers that trailed off as eyes met hers, and small smiles exchanged between those who understood the narrative unfolding. Recognition, she realized, is as much about perception as it is about action. Her presence, forged through years of disciplined service, had communicated authority without confrontation, earned respect without demand, and left a lasting impression without drama. Jessica adjusted her jacket, allowing the light to catch the edge of the tattoo on her back. It was a small emblem, yet it carried a profound story of dedication, courage, sacrifice, and resilience. The trident intertwined with the seal insignia represented countless hours of training, missions completed, teammates trusted and supported, and personal limits tested and surpassed. It was an unspoken narrative that only a few could truly interpret, yet its power had been evident to the pilot, whose subtle intervention had affirmed what words could not. She thought of the lessons this flight had reinforced. Even minor challenges can become meaningful opportunities to demonstrate character. Authority and respect are most potent when quietly asserted, when composure, patience, and presence are allowed to speak for themselves. Recognition, when granted by those capable of understanding, carries a weight far greater than ceremony or words. Jessica had experienced this in countless operations abroad, and she had witnessed it again in the microcosm of this flight. She reflected on the broader implications of this experience. Life is filled with moments that test patience, composure, and dignity. Recognition, respect, and acknowledgement may not always arrive immediately, and they may not be granted universally. Yet when they do arrive, often unexpectedly, they carry profound meaning. Jessica had seen this countless times in her service, and she had experienced it again in the microcosm of this ordinary flight. The lessons were consistent. Resilience, discipline, and the quiet assertion of authority matter in every context. As the plane began its descent, Jessica felt a profound sense of completion. The ordeal of earlier, The minor humiliation of being displaced, the subtle scrutiny of passengers, the temporary discomfort had resolved into affirmation, recognition, and satisfaction. She had navigated the challenge with composure, patience, and dignity, earning acknowledgement from those capable of understanding the significance of her experience. Her gaze returned, one last time, to the tattoo on her back, the emblem that had silently communicated a lifetime of service, resilience, and courage. The pilot had recognized it. The crew had acknowledged it. The passengers had sensed it. The moment of validation was subtle but undeniable, a testament to the power of quiet authority and presence. Jessica leaned back, feeling the plane glide smoothly toward the runway. She allowed herself a small, inward smile, a private acknowledgement of the journey from minor conflict to lasting affirmation. The story of the flight, a minor confrontation, transformed into a profound lesson in recognition. Patience and dignity would remain with her, a reminder that the principles she had lived by for years carried value in every circumstance. As the wheels touched down and the cabin filled with the gentle sounds of arrival, Jessica felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The episode had ended, yet its impact was lasting. Recognition and respect had been earned quietly, subtly, and effectively. Patience and composure had guided her through the challenge, and the acknowledgement she received reinforced the enduring principles of discipline, courage, and presence. The passengers disembarked, some casting glances of admiration, some whispering quietly about the woman who had navigated the situation with such calm authority. The flight attendants moved efficiently. The pilot returned to his seat, and the cabin, now emptied of most passengers, retained the faint echo of the subtle drama that had unfolded. Jessica Carter rose, confident and composed, a woman whose presence carried the quiet weight of a lifetime of service, resilience, and earned respect. And in that ordinary yet extraordinary moment, she carried with her a reminder that the principles that define true character, patience, composure, dignity, and quiet authority, transcend circumstance, earning recognition and respect in ways both subtle and profound.